Hello, my name is Owen. Today I'll be going through part 3 of Deadhouse Gates as a part of my Malazan reread. For those of you that don't know, I do weekly videos part by part, and I don't do spoilers for future books, only the book we're on and the books previous, so just Deadhouse Gates and Gardens of the Moon. So if you're reading through the book for the first time, this is a safe spot. Jumping straight into it, we got a lot to cover. The first thing I want to do is just go through Felician's storyline, then move on to Fiddler's storyline, and then like Kalam and Duker, like the Chain of Dog stuff, will probably be wrapped in to the theme discussion, which I think I got a great theory of what the theme is, because you know, guys, that's my favorite part, and I was struggling a little bit in the last video. I talked about that, but I think I finally have a good idea. So just jumping straight into it, one of the first big reveals we get in this part is Bodden's true identity. We learn that he is a member of the Talon, which is kind of like the anti-Claw, and I don't think it would have been possible for us to figure this out as a first-time reader, but basically, Tavor, Felician's sister, assigned Bodden to protect Felician, and one of the most heartbreaking reveals was that they were supposed to be out of there pretty quickly. It's just like Felician got caught in Benneth's grasp and got addicted to like the drug so quickly that she didn't want to leave, and Bodden was like, I can't. And he has the quote where it's like, I can't get someone out who doesn't want to leave. And so it's just so tragic that a lot of her trauma and her pain could have been avoided. However, I also think like maybe like on the ship over to the island, Bodden, you could just be like, yo, like I'm going to free you pretty soon. I feel like that could have been, I don't know why they couldn't have just told her. Like, maybe like not in the moment. I get that they're in the city, like they're chained up. She would have been like, oh, great, too happy, you know, suspicious. But like on the way over, you can't just like tell her like, hey, like maybe you shouldn't like do anything crazy dramatic to save us because I'm going to get you out of here in like a couple weeks anyway. Anyway, that gave me a lot of sympathy for Felician, because I think that was definitely a miscommunication, and I kind of, even though it's badass that Bodden is a member of the Talon, come on, bro, come on. So that was the big reveal there, and the other big thing that happens in their storyline is Hebrick. This is kind of jumping ahead a little bit, because then like the dragon comes down and like breathes magic fire on everybody, and like all the sailors, like they disappear, we don't get to see them anymore, and then like Bodden's skin turns like magic. Question mark. We're not really sure what's going on there. We're not really sure why there's a undead dragon flying through this warren. But they finally get out, and they get out back on, like, in the middle of the whirlwind, essentially. So they're back on the desert, they're back on the mainland with everybody else. And then eventually, Hebrick goes blind. And then because he's blind, it's a really cool concept in terms of, like, the magic world. It's like people who have lost their limbs have, like, ghost limbs. Like, they can still feel, like, their limbs that have been lost. But in this world, or specifically because of Hebrick and like his whatever was going on with him, because he's blind, his whole body is like equally ghostly. So he gets hands. He gets like invisible hands, which is very, very cool, and basically makes him like actually useful for the first time in this whole book. Physically, he was always useful mentally, guys. I'm not trying to hate on him. But yeah, so he has his hands now, and also he's kind of insane now. He just like rambles and like says cryptic things, but I think he's a lot more entertaining now. I will say that. I liked him in the beginning, but he was like too serious, dude. Like, lighten up. Like, how bad is this really? Anyway, he's kind of lost his mind a little bit, but he's got hands, so that's cool. The other thing that happens is Hebrick, Felician, and Culp stumble upon the Soul Taken ritual, and then we learn that many, many, many years ago, the Talanamas and the Soul Taken like participated in this ritual together, or like the Talanamas like helped them in this ritual, and basically it went wrong, which is very reminiscent of what's going on with the Path of Hands, and kind of explains why the undead dragon is like going somewhere, because there's a connection to like the Soul Taken and Talanamas, so a little bit going on there. And I'm speeding through this just because I want to get to like the theme stuff really quickly, if I'm not seeming like I'm going in depth as much as I normally do. And the other thing is, I guess this is just a really like tragic moment again for Felician, because you know she gets all the trauma, right? Let's just save it all for her. They kept talking about this theme, and by they I mean the author. Erickson, like this theme of like Felician's armor and how she feels like, oh, she has this armor, like she's impenetrable. And then there's the moment at the very end where Bodden comes back after leaving them, and he sacrifices himself. And he thought that the fire from the dragon would protect him from fire damage. Not true. So then he dies. And then there's a horrible, heart-wrenching line where it's just like, like armor, like we reveal like what's underneath, and it could hide like even a child, and then it falls away after sacrifice, and then it just like reminds us. So no matter how like snarky she is, no matter how she tears down her friends, how bitter and spiteful she is, we were reminded in that moment that she's literally just a kid. She's 15 years old, and she's been through a lot of stuff in a short amount of time, and she's just a kid, and it's absolutely tragic. I thought that was an absolutely beautiful line. But jumping over to Fiddler's storyline, like all those guys in Mappo and Icarium and Crocus, we learn Apsalar's quote-unquote destiny, the plan by Pust to have Apsalar be the resurrected Shaik and leader of the Whirlwind. And this was a little bit of a, I remember this first time I read that, I was very, very surprised by this. I did not see that coming, and basically the idea is like, if she leads the Whirlwind, she might be able to defeat the Empress, ? But it's very unclear how much of this was planned. And like they're using also like it's the concrete reveal that Servant is Apsalar's father, which you might have picked up on because of like he famously, not famously, I guess they said in the first book, Guardians of the Moon, that he only had one hand, and they said in this book many times that one hand's normal, the other hand's like very young, like it's new, and like the fisherman stuff. So like Mappo and Icarium caught on very quickly that he was her father, and they're kind of using him as leverage. But the question is how much of this was planned by Pust and then by extension Shadow, because they debate this. So like Fiddler and Crocus are kind of like, oh, this is the plan all along. They possessed her. That way she has the skills of Cotillion. She could lead the Whirlwind. And then Mappo's like, maybe it's also possible that like Shadowthrone and Cotillion are like making this up on the fly. Like Shaik died and they're like, wait a minute, you know, it'd be pretty sweet if, and they do it that way. I'm going to do the opinion that, because honestly, I honestly don't remember how this book like ends in terms of this plot line and this planning stuff. I'm under the guess that it was completely a coincidence, because I feel like it's such a backwards plan. It's like, I'm going to possess this girl, then I'm going to unpossess her. That way she has my skills and some of my memories. That way when this girl, this leader of the rebellion dies a couple months later, she could take the place and like be possessed by another goddess, and like two gods in one makes super god. Because that really doesn't make any sense. Like, just let Kalam kill the Empress if you want to kill the Empress so bad. So that's going on there. But we also learned that the Path of Hands and the Whirlwind coinciding is also not a coincidence. Heberick mentions that it's not a coincidence. And then also in the Fiddler storyline, they mentioned too, like, they think Pust has something to do with the Path of Hands, because it's not a coincidence that the Path of Hands coincides with the Temple of Shadow. So is this a master plan to have two things go at once? Is Shadow just caught in the middle of it? Are they just trying to take advantage of these two things coinciding? Who is pulling the strings here? It's not entirely clear. So going on from there, we also get a big reveal about Icarium and like what he's about. Because we know that Mappo is hiding something from him. He keeps losing his memories. We also learned that he's famous for being a weapon of mass destruction. He basically is the Incredible Hulk. He turns into a giant raging beast, or he just goes on a rampage essentially, and just commits genocide over and over and over. So he has a reputation for doing that, and we learned that like Mappo is kind of like his protector, and by protecting him, he protects the rest of the world from him. And there's a great line which refers to our theme from the first book, because nothing ever goes away in this series. It's like talking about how Mappo is linked to Icarium, and he says, not by one chain, but 1,000. So in terms of this chaining metaphor of being chained to something, Mappo is chained to Icarium. And Fiddler's basically like, dude, why would you take on this burden? Like, it's like this is horrible for you. He's like, well, some burdens are chosen. Like, he chooses to do this because he has this weird connection with Icarium. Like, he's friends with him. He truly cares about him. But also, he knows that, like, this guy is, like, potentially the world's most threatening threat, I guess you could say. So it's a very complex relationship there. And there's also another great moment where Mappo and Icarium are having a conversation. And, like, in Mappo's head, he's like, yeah, we're at this point again, which just shows, like, the cyclical nature of, like, their relationship. Like, they get to a point where Icarium starts questioning Mappo. He's like, hey, like, you've been with me the whole time. Like, why don't you tell me what you remember about me? Because, like, I don't remember anything. He's like, oh, here we go again. He's like, oh, well, I can't really tell. It would just be my version of you. You got to figure out for yourself. Please take that as an answer. Please take that as an answer. And just, like, these conversations have been happening every single cycle when Icarium loses his memory. And I thought that was incredibly interesting, and it plays directly into the theme, which is the cyclical nature of history. And like the quote, those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. I think that this is truly the main core theme that connects every single storyline. There's multiple themes in all of these books, but I really look for the ones that have resonance in every single storyline that we have going on here. And this is present in the Whirlwind. The Whirlwind has risen before in rebelling against the Malazan Empire. This has happened. The Path of Hands has happened before, as we learned with the ritual with the soul taken. Fiddler is once again on a journey through the desert, in service of like the empire, the idea of the empire. So he's done this before. Kalam once again has conflicting emotions about his allegiance to his people and his allegiance to the Malazan Empire and his friends in the Bridge Burners. This has happened before. Akarium and Mappo, their entire storyline is about repeating the past and being doomed to repeat the past. And the first time I read this book, and I think I mentioned this in an earlier video, I didn't really understand like what Mappo and Akarium's purpose was. I'm like, okay, like yeah, this guy's like a Jekyll and Hyde. He exists here with his keeper. Give me back to the good stuff. And really, I think the relationship in this book is to really hammer this concept home about history consistently, constantly repeating itself. And that's why the quote with like them repeating the conversation is so interesting, because they get to a point where Mappo's like, we've never reached this point in the conversation before. Where Akarium asks like, oh, like, why don't you just tell me what you know about me that I don't remember? And he's like, okay, we've been here before. Then he like takes it one step further and he's like, I think like you are important to why, I think you are like part of the reason why I can't remember things, essentially what he says. And then Mappo's like, well, you've never said that before. So things are starting to like get off the rails of like the cycle a little bit in their relationship. Other things, just in small scale, Shaik being reborn, it'd kind of be like a recycling of her, because she's dead, but she's not really dead, because she's going to be reborn young and new, which is what they want Apsar to be. And then even on Apsar's regard, they want her to repeat history and becoming possessed by another god. And then there's also, referring to the chain of dogs, there's Lul's, like I feel like it's one of the most famous quotes in the book, if you know Malazan in this book at all. It's the children are dying quote, and he's like, that's like he basically says like, children are dying. Like, Duker, you don't need to write tomes of history. That summarizes every single problem we have with the world, is it causes children to die, essentially. And that's a cause of history. And all these children are dying because of economic conditions, war, famine, all that stuff. It can be summarized by children are dying. And that's why it's so interesting. And the reason, all right, there's two things that really hammer this home for me. Because obviously it's like, okay, yeah, like history repeats itself, like whoop-de-dang-do. Like I feel like it's a very common thread in a lot of books, but the other reason why I think that this has to be Erickson's main point is the constant emphasis of obelisk. So many readings of the Deck of Dragons, they talk about obelisk and how it's like an unaligned thing, and how it hasn't been active in the Seven Cities, but now is showing up in every reading. And they reveal that obelisk is time. It's past, present, and future. And they keep mentioning it, and it's so throwaway that it's like, okay, I don't care about obelisk. It sounds like they don't even really explain it that deeply, but every time they mention it, they mention that it hasn't been active before, and then it's time. That it's time aspected. And Akarium is connected to time. He's obsessed with time, and it's related to Akarium. It's time. And it wasn't active before, but it's active now. So what does that mean to me? It means that before time, there was no linearness in the Seven Cities. They were constantly on a repeat cycle. But now it's active, which means that maybe time will be like introduced in this world. Maybe things will move beyond the cycle. Now, if this was just like a repeat of the cycle, it could be a great story. But because, the series has to progress, I think it's fairly obvious to say that things are going to break the cycle a little bit. And the question is, what is going to be changed in the cycle, and who are the people that are going to change it? Because Obelisk is now active in the Seven Cities. And that's why it's so interesting that we have two historians as two major characters in this book. So we have Heberick and we have Duker. And I think these two characters play a very different role of like the historian characters. Duker is like the very obvious historian. It's like his like main job in the army. And his role is really the observer. He's trying to absorb as much as he can about the Chain of Dogs and record it all so it is remembered. He is like step one of like the history, stopping history from repeating itself process. Like someone has to remember it, or else like we're going to forget and we're going to do the same thing over and over again. And there's so many interesting aspects of this like in this character, and I talked about this last time, but he's such a great character. And also we learned that he used to be a soldier. Then Kellen Vid was like, listen, we don't need like stupid nerd historians, right? We want cool historians. You're gonna be a historian. He's like, I don't even know how to read. He's like, well, you're gonna learn how to read. So then there's that, but then we also know that Coltane really knows the importance of Dooker in his role because he throws him directly in the middle of battle. And like even Dooker's like, listen, if you want me to observe things, why am I in the middle of combat? Because Coltane think that's the important thing to record. And then also just in terms of like the battle scene, there's a huge battle scene at the end of this part. And I would say like in terms of like mass scale combat, it's not my most favorite thing to read about in fantasy. But this one, they kind of change up the strategy because we had a couple like Dooker in the middle of combat. He's fighting people. It's chaos. This one, he really gets, for a majority of the battle, he gets like a overhead view. So he kind of like, Erikson personifies the army as like different movements. Like he's like, we can see the shapes and like the ebbs and flows of like the masses of bodies like fighting. It's like they're protecting the wagons. They push out, they contract, they push out, they contract, and like he really emphasizes the use of like shapes. And I feel like that was just on a side note, it was a unique way to like change up the flow of how you're describing battles instead of just individuals fighting swords, clashing, stabbing, blood. Oh, it's more like shapes, contracting, expanding, moving, shifting, snaking, stuff like that, which I just thought was a unique on a side note. But also one of Dooker's main responsibilities is to, and I think this is just interesting because I never thought about this before because I'm an idiot. He talks about multiple times in this part how his job is to record the list of the fallen, which is basically the list of people that have died and their names. And he has a great speech about how he thinks it's stupid that we record the names of the people who died and not the names of the people who lived, because like recording the names of people that died is kind of like accusing those that lived and saying like, you're unnamed because you lived, and these are all the people that died and it should have been you, essentially, is what Dooker says. So he says like, he's like, if I die, I don't want anybody to remember my name because I don't want to accuse the living of like, or they should feel guilty for having survived something that I died through. I thought that was like an interesting perspective on that. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I just think that it's a very relatable and a very human emotion that's coming out of Dooker there, which I think Erikson is like probably the best ever at. But the list of the fallen sounds mighty like Malazan, or oh guys, I said it. It's been a while since I said Malazan, right? But it's Malazan. Malazan Book of the Fallen. List of the Fallen, which tells you a little bit about what this series is about, I guess. But it begs the question, I think, if Dooker is the keeper of this list of the fallen, who's writing the Book of the Fallen? Something to think about, perhaps. I know, but maybe you don't. Anyway, just something to think about, because why would they call it Book of the Fallen? Maybe nobody is writing it. Maybe everyone is writing it constantly. Something to think about. That's all I got to say. Then the other historian we have is Heberic. Now, he's a lot less like heavily emphasized as a historian. Like he talks about his old books and how he thought that the Empress botched the assassin job, which she did. But I really see him as part two of the history not repeating itself process. He seems really like a catalyst character to me. He is the one that knows the history and is only purpose in life is to prevent it from repeating itself. Maybe not overtly, but it's just like the way that his story has been progressing. He's just been stumbling upon strange things the whole time. By him touching the statue, he gains these magical powers that nobody fully understands. He's like protecting Felicen. He is like connected to so many gods. He pulled a god from the sky. Man's just causing chaos. He's a bull in a china shop, causing chaos wherever he goes. And it's suffice to say that no one like Heberic has ever existed in the history of the universe. Therefore, if anyone's going to change things, it might just be him. And just keep that in mind, perhaps. I think that the first time reading through, I did not understand Heberic at all, because he does a lot of weird stuff, especially in this book. I just like, it's hard to get a grasp on like what this guy's purpose is, because Felicen, I think, is very heartily the main character in this book. But my man's there. And he's protecting Felicen, and he's touching weird stuff. He's gaining weird magical powers. He's healing people, but maybe like instilling something weird in them. But he's still alive, which is incredible. But I just thought that was interesting. If Dooker is the observer to record it, Heberic might be someone to like throw a wrench in the plans and the cycles of history. And the other major thing I want to talk about in this part is, I think, one of the other things in Gardens of the Moon was the concept of compassion and how important compassion is, how it is rewarded. And there was a little bit of that earlier in this book, but I think that this part really, really brought that theme back. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say that compassion is like a major theme of this series so far, especially because of how I feel it's emphasized in the first book with Paran and the Hounds. But yeah, so in this part we have a lot of examples of that, and I have literally a list. so we first one of the major ones we have is like the demon, the Aptorian, where it's following Kalam, and then like Kalam like sees like the crucified kids that have been killed. He's like, man, like it enrages me that I can't save these kids. And for some reason, the demon is so connected to Kalam at this point that he's like, or the demon's like, oh, like I also want to save them. So then the demon goes to Shadowthrone and is like, save the kids. And Shadowthrone's like, what? Save the kids? What would I do with a bunch of kids? And the demon's like, please. And Shadowthrone, which is a weird moment because we've never seen Shadowthrone do anything nice. He's like, yeah, sure. And he saves a bunch of kids. And like this demon has like this kid army. And then one kid like transforms into a little demon, which I thought was like a really sweet moment. And then it comes back later when the demon also saves Lystara and Pearl and Duker in that one fight scene where we first see it from Duker's perspective. He's like, wait, who's throwing knives right now? And then we learn it's Pearl. And then Pearl is about to die with Lystara, and then the demon comes in and saves them. So like it's kind of like a convergence of like some storylines there for a little bit. But the demon really is like number one compassion player. Put your hands together for the demon. Apt is killing it. Apt is killing it on the compassion front, saving a lot of lives. And then we also have, back to Kalam, even his saving of Manala and Kaneb and the rest of their little party to begin with. But then the part where he like unveils like Quickben's warren. He was supposed to go directly to the Empress at this point, or directly to like the capital to kill the Empress. But instead, he changes his plan and he goes to Aaron, he said. And I don't think this is explicitly said, but I think it's heavily implied because it's like, he's like, well, where are we going? He goes, and it's like, he pauses and he's like, oh, fine, we'll go to Aaron. And like, he goes there instead. So he starts taking him on this journey, which is obviously throwing a wrench in his plans because his one goal is to kill the Empress and he's going to save these people instead. Then the other thing is just in general, Bodden and Heberick saving Felicen. We know that Bodden was hired to do it, but he definitely at a certain point could have been completely in his right, or in a certain way, to abandon her, because she's basically like, I don't want your protection. I know who you are. I know you're sent by my sister. Screw my sister. Get out of my face or I'll kill you. He could have easily left, but he came back and he saved her life again. And Heberick is just like, he didn't even know that Bodden was hired to do it, and he was just looking out for her anyway because he just sees a child that's in danger and that has been messed up. So in a way, like, he's trying to break the lull, like, children are dying quote, because he's like, well, if I could save this one, this is literally a kid, even though she hates me, maybe I should try. And then he does. Then the other thing we have is, back to the chain of dogs. Duker has a moment with the servants. The nobles are like, they get their swords back and they're just like whipping them and like beating them and stuff. And Duker's like, none of that. He saves the servants. And then finally, just the concept of the chain of dogs as a whole, because they emphasize multiple times that Coltaine could end the war right now by himself with his army. He's such a good general, such a good militaristic mastermind that if he just abandoned the refugees, he could slaughter the army and the war would be done. But because he wants to protect as many innocent lives as possible, that's why it's this train, and that's why it's this endless uphill battle, which I think is just super tragic, because they also really emphasize in this part, and even in the last part too, that the rebellion in itself is doomed no matter what. If like a reserve army comes up, like with Tavor and the Emperor sends another like battalion or whatever, they stand literally no chance against the Empire as a whole. So this battle between the Chain of Dogs and the Whirlwind is not like for the fate of the Empire or the Seven Cities. It's just people dying, literally. But the concept that Coltaine could end it, but he just chooses not to because he wants to protect people, I think it's pretty powerful. Other than that, we're chugging along. I think just like as like a kind of like review analysis of this one, I think that, like I said, this is like the part where I had like the eureka moment, but this one is a little bit slower part, I think, compared especially to the last one. But the last part, part 4, is like 300 pages long, and we get the climax of every single storyline. I can't even think about how long that video is going to be. And also just like a general update on me. You can tell I'm not in the spot that I usually am. I have filmed here before, and I probably will never film here again, and I'll never film my old spot again because I'm moving. So I apologize if things like next week are delayed a little bit, or things are a little weird, or I'm in a spot where like I look unflattering in the light. things are a little chaotic for me, just like they'll be chaotic in part 4 of Deadhouse Gates. As always, leave a comment below of what you guys are thinking. Anything I missed, you guys correct me a lot, which I really do appreciate. Especially like last time, I think my biggest mistake was like not missing the implication that the Talena Mask didn't actually sacrifice himself, which I think is kind of weird. And I mean, obviously, like rereading it, that's definitely the case. But I think it's weird that they had Stormy like balls. I was like, he sacrificed himself, and then he's like, actually, no, he didn't. I feel like that was a weird like pull you out moment. So I actually didn't like that I had learned that. So actually, you know what? It's your fault. I'm kidding. Obviously, I was wrong, but I think it's strange that Erickson decided to like pull that one out from under us, especially with the themes of like compassion and stuff like that. But obviously, I miss a lot, and I want to know your guys' thoughts below. On the last video, a lot of you guys left comments about like recommendations for like different channels to check out who like dissect different battles, and that's not really my forte. So I forget what they're called right now, but check the comments of the last video and check those videos out if you're interested in like more like tactical stuff. Because I will probably watch those at some point. It's just I'm not very good at analyzing them on my own. Be sure to like and subscribe if you like the video and you'd like to see more in the future. I'll see you guys next week, and thanks for sticking around.